Hello and welcome to Ultimate Comparison iPad Pro. Today we're going to be looking at the iPad Pro 9.7-inch device and comparing it with the 12.9-inch device with a particular focus on drawing. Let's start with screen size. Now, the 12.9-inch iPad Pro comes in almost 13 inches, which is what you would expect of a standard MacBook Pro or a MacBook of a few years ago, and that means that you would not expect it to seem that large. But in fact, when you're using the iPad Pro 12.9-inch device, you hold it much closer to your face than you would do a laptop, and for that reason, everything seems quite a bit larger than you would expect on a laptop. For that reason, you may find that holding an iPad Pro 9.7-inch device up to your face is actually similar to the old days of having a 13-inch laptop just sitting a little further away. This difference somewhat fades away when you actually come down to drawing on the tablets, because when you draw on the iPad Pro, you will hold it, as far away from yourself as you would a normal sketchpad or drawing tablet. And so when you're drawing on the iPad Pro 9.7, you will feel that it is significantly more cramped than the 12.9-inch device. It depends on what you're drawing, really, but if you're used to drawing on an A4 size sketchpad, you'll find that the 12.9-inch device is much more comfortable to use. It's quite difficult actually to draw on the iPad Pro with your hand kind of hovering in the air or sort of half on the side of the device. So drawing in portrait didn't work so well for me on the iPad Pro 9.7, but working in landscape worked just fine. Of course, if you're drawing on the iPad Pro 12.9-inch device, I found that actually both were perfectly usable. Obviously, landscape was a very luxurious experience, but if you happen to want to draw something in portrait and you wanted to use the entire 12.9-inch screen, that worked out perfectly fine as well. Now, if you're drawing on the right-hand side of the iPad Pro 12.9-inch device, you'll run into the same issue that you do with the 9.7-inch device, where your hand is kind of hovering or resting on the side of the device. And in that case, obviously, it depends on what app you're using. You can usually just shift the entire canvas off to the left. If you're using Apple Notes, which is actually the app which I tend to use the most, then you just have to deal with it, basically, or just zoom in so that the image moves a bit further over to the left. Now, obviously, drawing a full body character was no problem on the iPad Pro 12.9-inch device, but I was worried that the 9.7-inch device was not going to be large enough, especially as I expected to be drawing mostly in landscape. So I did a few tests, and one of them you can find on my NihongoGamer vlog channel, where I tested out the iPad Pro 9.7 drawing a full body character from head to toe in landscape, and that worked out just fine. Obviously that would work out just fine in portrait as well, but then you have the issue with your hand hovering off the side of the device. So essentially, if you want to draw a full body character on the iPad Pro 9.7 in landscape, it is possible. I just did find that I was zooming in a little bit more often than before, but it wasn't really so distracting that I was losing sense of proportion or having any issues like that. Now, while we're on the topic of screen size, let's just talk about the size of the devices themselves. The iPad Pro 12.9 is a significantly larger device to hold, and for most man bags or purses, you'll find that the 12.9 requires you to bring around a special type of bag in order to actually carry it anywhere. Of course, it's not much larger than a 13-inch laptop, but I think the days where we're used to carrying around 13-inch laptops are kind of over. We're all really used to carrying around just our smartphones and our iPads and being able to do pretty much everything we need to do on just those devices. So if you have a small bag and you're not expecting to carry a rucksack around everywhere you go, obviously the iPad Pro 9.7 is going to be a much more convenient device to bring around. The other thing about screen size, which is an issue, is that when you're drawing in public, I found that drawing on the 9.7, I didn't really get that many glares or looks. People weren't always staring over my shoulder like, oh, that guy's using an Apple Pencil on an iPad. I think really people just kind of left me to do my own thing. Whereas when I got the 12.9-inch device out on a train or in a cafe, I would definitely get some looks and people would kind of stare, and I just got the feeling that the person next to me would be peering over my shoulder, and there was no way to really cover what I was drawing, even though, I guess I should be proud of anything that I'm sketching, but it's just the way with art, isn't it? When you're practicing and you're not 100% sure that it's something that you're going to publish, you don't really want people to stare at it until you've actually published it. And so I found that the 9.7-inch device was much better in terms of privacy. I just didn't like the way that people could just stare at everything you were doing. And that's not just for drawing. If you're checking your emails, watching a YouTube video, everything you do is much, much larger. And because of the angle that you use an iPad, it's also just much more plainly visible because you use the device in a mostly face-up kind of fashion. Now, you could obviously just hold the iPad up more like a laptop, but then you run into the issue where you look like you're taking a picture of people, and that makes other people feel uncomfortable, which is also not quite so ideal. So most of the time I found that I was only really bringing the 9.7-inch device out with me, and that was essentially because a smaller screen size was actually better and a little bit more private. Now let's talk about comfort. I found that both devices were incredibly comfortable to use. Because they're so thin, you don't feel like you're drawing on a large, chunky, tablet PC. Now if you are using the 12.9-inch device, I found that it was the ultimate in comfort, especially when you're using it at home. Now the most common places that I would find myself drawing were sitting on a couch or just lounging back in a recliner or even just sitting in bed. And actually in all three of these places, the larger device was much more comfortable to use because it's so large. Because of the height it has when it is in portrait mode, you can actually rest it on your legs or rest it, on your chest and actually have the device come up to a very usable height for drawing, which is really nice. If you tried to do that with the 9.7, you would find the device kind of hovering on the top of your knees, or you would be supporting it a lot with your left hand. Being able to have the whole device just rest on your chest or just on your legs while you're sitting down and relaxing is completely different, and it makes it really comfortable to use. Conversely, the iPad Pro 9.7 is much lighter, and you'll find that when you're out and about, this is much more useful when you're drawing, and especially something I didn't expect was to be able to draw while standing. Now, when you're holding the iPad Pro 9.7 in portrait, it's not that comfortable for drawing, but when you hold it in landscape mode, it's surprisingly usable. You can take notes on this thing, you can draw entire pictures on this thing. I found that even when I was in a train, I could draw quite steadily without too much shake. That's something I don't even find I can do with pencil and paper. Perhaps that's because the iPad Pro is such a strong, rigid device. Now, after all of these comparisons, you're probably wondering which one is the best value for money, and with the smaller version coming in at $600 and the larger one coming in at $800, there's not a very large price difference for a very much larger screen real estate. The real question is whether you would actually bring a 13-inch device around with you, and I would say that since I've owned both, I can pretty much say that you will not bring the 13-inch device around with you. It's just not that convenient, and it just stands out too much. However, if you do plan to use it mostly at home, you will get a lot more use out of the larger device. I think you'll probably just improve as an artist as well, because having a larger screen will prevent you from drawing in a cramped way or zooming in too much and creating sort of bad habits that, can't really be replicated with real pencil and real paper. Now, no comparison would be complete without talking about the competition, and the iPad Air 2 is a seriously good product still. Of course, it doesn't have the Apple Pencil, so if you want to draw, you'll have to go for a third-party stylus. You can still get one for $400, and if you want the 64GB configuration, that'll go for $500. So even with 64 gigabytes, which is larger than the base iPad Pro configuration, you're still looking at a cheaper device. You just have to make sure that you get yourself a third-party stylus. If you want a device with a stylus actually included in the set, you could go for the Surface Pro 4, or in fact the Surface 3. Both have very competent styluses. I don't personally use one because of certain glitchy effects that I don't like. I've talked about it in previous videos, but the Surface Pro range now uses a stylus that introduces strange digital artifacts that I don't really like. Now, this is less about comparisons and more just about apps, but I want to say that with the iPad Pro, I still haven't found a third-party app that has a really great pencil sketching experience. I've tried Adobe Sketch and Procreate and Ibis Paint and Medibang Paint and just so many different apps, and I really have not found a pencil which is as good as the default Apple Notes app yet. So that's why I always do my demonstrations using Apple Notes. I just find that the pencil comes out more organically. If you try it with Procreate, it doesn't scatter the rough lead enough. It doesn't look quite right for me, and it's also not as responsive. Apparently Procreate has the fastest sketching engine, but really I still find that it has this weird delay where you draw a stroke quickly and then the line just kind of appears suddenly after like a split second, which I don't quite like compared to Apple Notes, which is just so much smoother and so much faster. So that's less about comparisons, and I just want to say that with the iPad Pro, you're going to find yourself, for rough sketching, the Apple Notes app is still probably the best app out there. In terms of battery life, you'll find that actually both devices run for about the same amount of time. The larger device has a larger battery, and you might think that means it will run for longer, but in fact, because it's got a larger screen to run, it actually runs for more or less the same amount of time as the smaller iPad Pro 9.7, which is about 10 hours. I think if you're drawing quite continuously, you'll have to charge it every 2.5 to 3 days. If you draw quite casually, like every day you're just doing a quick little sketch, you may be able to get all the way through the week without actually having to charge either the device or the pencil. That's essentially it for now, guys. I think both devices are really, really wonderful, and the only problem is that you can't really have both, or there's no sort of happy medium. Unfortunately, you just have a 10-inch device or a 13-inch device, and while I really do love the 13-inch device and I use it all the time that I'm at home, I just do not bring it anywhere. So if you had to choose between one or the other, and you do know that you will be going out and about, bringing it to college, bringing it to classes, or maybe just going to cafes and drawing, I think you're going to find that the 9.7-inch device is more flexible for you. If you have the ability to have both, obviously that would be really great, and when you're at home having the larger device, just letting it rest on your chest or rest on your legs to be able to draw, it's so comfortable. And honestly, if you're an artist and you're using this to practice your art as well, I'm pretty sure that you'll find you improve much more quickly with the larger screen because you don't develop any sort of bad habits. That said, we're all looking for devices that don't just do one thing. We can't just have a device that draws. We gotta have a device that draws and also does our homework and also watches YouTube videos and also sends emails and all of those hundreds of other things. And in that regard, the iPad Pro 9.7 really is the winner here. I really hope that Apple continues to make the larger device because I like it, and it's certainly the device that I use the most. But the 9.7 is the one that I will actually bring out places. If I only had the 12.9-inch device and I had to choose between bringing my iPad and not bringing it, I would probably just leave it at home now because it's just too big and too obvious. Even if it's not too big for the bag that I'm carrying, I don't really want to draw on a device that large when I'm at a cafe. It's just a little bit too obvious. The 9.7 really is the perfect happy medium. What do you think? Have you got an iPad Pro 9.7 or 12.9, or are you looking to choose one and you've made your decision now? Do let me know in the comments which one you think is the best one and which one is going to be most useful for you. And of course, don't forget to comment and subscribe to the channel, and I will see you in the next NihongoGamer video. Will this 9.7-inch iPad Pro, will it be good enough? Will it be large enough? Oh, this is so much better. I'm so glad I decided to do this. If you just want a thicker line, you really just have to push a little bit harder. This iPad is the perfect size because you can bring it anywhere, and I think it will really encourage you to just sketch, practice, get better and get better, and I can't think of a better way to do that than with the iPad because you waste less paper.